Hello everyone, welcome to week 9. There's only 2 weeks after this, so we're really heading down the home stretch right now. This week is going to be a follow-up to the discussion board we had last week, where you read Matthew's article where he defended teaching to the test, and of course that's if the test is a good test. He talked about what's the difference between teaching to, say, our state assessments, New York State assessments, which reflect our standards, or teaching to your own teacher-made test. Now, my contention is that teachers don't teach to their teacher-made tests. They create them after they teach. And this is an issue that I have, and we will see in the 2 weeks following the last 2 weeks of this course, when we talk about classroom assessment, that what we need to do, or what I would recommend and what many of the experts recommend, is that we create our assessments first. And that doesn't necessarily mean a pencil and paper test that we create first, but that should be created first as well. So you know what you're going to test, you let the kids know what you're going to test, and then you teach to it. And it should reflect the standards. So that's one of the reasons that I chose this textbook, Popham's textbook, is because it's one of the only ones that I know about that it really addresses the question of test prep, which is a hot topic today, and everybody has heard or seen the mindless test prep that can go on in some classrooms because administrators think or believe or are ignorant of any other way to increase achievement. So they make teachers for 2 or 3 weeks prior to the exam make the kids do mindless test prep. So, wow, is that a way to turn kids off? Yeah, I think so. So that's what we're going to talk about this week, and we'll also have another discussion board about it, because there are things teachers can do to not give kids stress and to relieve stress. Okay, this week's agenda, we're going to talk about test anxiety, test monsters, etc. We're going to talk about appropriate and inappropriate test prep practices. Some of you have already mentioned these in the previous discussion board. You've read ahead. And then we'll talk about one teacher who wrote about teaching to the test, and that's it. I wanted to remind everybody that you are supposed to be filling out your vocabulary in your own words. I'm going to be collecting that and grading it. So we've had a vocabulary quiz already, so you should have what I consider the definitions from that quiz. I think about half the words. And so make sure you're continuing to fill in. One of the things I found in this course is that people have priorities, so they put things that aren't due, they put them off, and then they rush through them the week before they're due just to get the course over with. And I've received some pretty bad vocabulary in your own words, so be doing that as you go along. It's much easier that way. Okay. As part of your discussion board, I want you, there's a USA Today article, or I believe it was in USA Today, I'm not positive, but there's an article called Toughening Up for the Tests, and it's about part of the article is about teachers creating these test monsters, which you see the picture of there, to help kids relieve stress. There's also a USA Today article that talks about teachers and how they're relieving stress today, and a National Education Association Today article that also talks about things you can do to relieve stress in testing situations. And here's a question. Now, I don't have a discussion board specifically on this because I want you to incorporate this into the one discussion board that I do have. Because anxiety is usually a self-imposed infliction, this is my opinion, of course, Are there strategies or practices that teachers can use to reduce test anxiety? And should we be teaching them along with other test prep activities? Why or why not? I know when I taught this live, I had a phys ed teacher in my class, and I mentioned the practice of yoga, which I do and I think is wonderful. And I said, wouldn't this be great to teach kids some yoga as part of phys ed class? And oh, did he scoff at me? And I thought, oh, what is wrong with this picture? I mean, why wouldn't we want to teach yoga in phys ed class? I mean, it's something kids can take part in through their whole adult lives, rather than be playing basketball, which maybe a handful of us will continue doing the rest of our lives. Well, one of the things that I was always big on when I was a high school principal was trying to get my teachers to teach things that kids would be involved in the rest of their lives, lifelong activities. Isn't that what we want? Teach kids about nutrition, how to eat well, how to stay healthy, how to do an exercise regime, all kinds of things like that kids will be involved in or can be involved in. So anyway, I just shook my head, and the rest of the class pretty much attacked this guy. A phys ed teacher saying yoga's not a phys ed activity, an appropriate one. So anyway, read these 3 articles, and that's food for thought, and then we'll put everything together when we get to our discussion board, and I'll talk about that more at the end of this presentation. When we talk about high-stakes testing, and No Child Left Behind has made pretty much all of our assessments high stakes because they are published in the paper, they are used for accountability purposes. Low-performing schools, as we heard from my No Child Left Behind presentation, receive certain consequences, and after so many years, it could mean dissolving the school. So they're here to stay. I mean, people, believe it or not, we may not like them and the pressure they put on us, but the public likes them. They shine a spotlight on us. They get to compare schools. They get to see how their school is doing compared to other schools or compared to similar schools. Now, the similar schools comparison that the state does I think is a valid exercise. So we're comparing schools with the same size, the same demographics, the same poverty level. It's a free lunch, number of kids getting free lunch or percentage of kids getting free lunch. We're comparing schools that are like each other. So you're not comparing Scarsdale with Rhinebeck High School, okay, because they're 2 different places. So anyway, I think it's going to be a long time before we get out of the high stakes assessment business. One of the things that Alfie said in his rage or rant, or as some of you called it, is that tests aren't a part of life. They're not real life. We don't encounter tests. But the reality is we do encounter these tests. We encounter them all the time. You folks have taken some already and will take more. The CSTs on disability, the CST multi-subject, the LAST, the ASTW. So almost every profession, every white-collar profession, even blue-collar professions have certification or entrance examinations that people have to take. So we will always have these kind of tests, and who would want to hire a lawyer who hadn't passed the New York State bar exam, or a doctor who hadn't passed his medical boards? So it's a gateway activity to screen people that don't at least have the minimal amount of knowledge to succeed in the profession. So we have these tests, and we will continue to have them. Because of our state assessments, when it was always a specialized field, the private sector has taken over. I mean, the public sector has taken over some of the test prep that used to be reserved for SAT prep classes like Kaplan and businesses and corporations like that, who used to prepare kids for the SATs or the GREs or Miller Analogies, which was another college entrance test. But now test prep is going on in our classrooms. And it's not necessarily the same kind of test prep that these corporations are doing. It's test prep that isn't ethical or isn't good for kids. Let's talk about some test prep guidelines that Popham mentions in his chapter on test prep. The first one he mentions is professional ethics, and we all know what that is. That's cheating. And there are some teachers that cheat and don't even know it. A couple years ago, in my old school district, I used to work I was an assistant principal in the Bethlehem Central School District. A teacher took a pilot exam and made copies of it. Now, we all know now from what we've read that when the state is creating exams, they pilot them first. So they use the IRT to compare test questions to see their level of difficulty. So that's item response theory. So we're piloting exams all the time. So we're throwing some questions out and we're adding new questions every year. So on that pilot test, there could be, and probably will be, questions that will be on the next assessment. So in Bethlehem, a teacher made a copy of the pilot exam and probably innocently thinking, oh, I can use this for preparing my kids next year. Well, that's what she did. She used it in her class the next year, and there was a bunch of questions that were on the test. So my guess is that teacher got fired, knowing the superintendent in Bethlehem, that is something that is unethical. I mean, and you need to know that, because you'll risk your own future. I mean, what Popham talks about in his chapter is using the same form test, which is how you would get that. You would break into the guidance office, I guess, and get a copy of the test and use it to prepare your kids. So that's unethical. That'll get you fired. So don't do it. The other one is a little bit touchier. It's what he calls educational defensibility, and how he defines that is that you can't falsely increase what we would call a false positive, that you're increasing kids' test scores, but you're not increasing their mastery. Excuse me. So that's how he talks about educational defensibility. And so he uses that when he talks about some of the different practices, which I'll talk about after this. What I thought was interesting was this blowing the whistle. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Was this blowing the whistle? This was taken from a survey done in 1991, and it was done asking teachers if they have witnessed any of these inappropriate testing practices. Now, notice it says several inappropriate testing practices right up here, often or frequently in their school. And you can see you would expect these to be smaller: changing a student's answer, giving students the answer. And now I have heard of resource room teachers doing this when a kid has separate location accommodations, and you know how you can give, especially if you're reading the test to a student, by emphasizing, is it A, is it B, is it C? And you read the answer. So there are ways to do it and fool yourself into believing you're not cheating. And you'll notice the bottom one here, giving practices on passages highly similar to those in the test. And this is 30% who said they often or frequently saw people doing this. Now, what do you think that percentage would be now? I would guess in the 90s, 95. Almost everyone does this. Now, is this right? Well, I'll talk more about it later when I go over all the test prep practices. But I think teaching test taking as a literacy genre, like fiction, like nonfiction, poetry, prose, those are all genres of literacy. Reading tests should be looked at as another form of literacy, and we should teach kids. And most schools are doing this. How do you take tests? How do you read questions? How do you throw out the least obvious, etc., etc. What's good guessing? Things like that. Of course, the when in doubt, choose C. I wouldn't be pushing that, but I've often heard that from some of my students. But anyway, so I am going to stop here.